At first glance, Antarctica should produce the smallest creatures on Earth. The water here sits just below freezing. Energy is limited. Growth is slow. Life moves carefully. In most oceans, extreme cold favors small bodies. Smaller animals need less oxygen. They mature faster. They survive harsh seasons more easily. And yet, beneath Antarctic ice, the opposite appears. Sea spiders span wider than dinner plates. Crustaceans related to pillbugs swell to the size of a football. Jellyfish drift with bells broader than human arms. And worms thicken beyond the width of a garden hose. These are not ancient remnants. They are living animals, thriving in conditions that seem designed to restrict them. Scientists call this pattern polar gigantism, a recurring tendency for organisms in extreme cold and in the deepest ocean basins to grow unexpectedly large. But why here? What is different about Antarctica? How can freezing water support larger bodies? And what biological advantage does size provide in such an extreme place? Tonight, we explore one of the strangest biological patterns on Earth. But before we continue, if these deep sea explorations bring you comfort, I'd love it if you gave this one a like and maybe tapped subscribe. And if you'd be so kind, let me know in the comments where you're winding down from tonight and what time is it there. It's always a joy to see how far across the world this little sleepy corner of science travels. Now take a deep breath, let your shoulders relax, and together let's descend into the cold waters of Antarctica. Long before any creature traced a fin through southern seas, the planet itself began a slow rearranging, like continents drifting in a patient dance too gradual for memory. Antarctica once rested beside other lands, joined to South America and Australia in an ancient configuration of stone. Over spans of millions of years, the crust shifted, plates sliding apart by distances smaller than a fingernail each season, yet relentless in their direction. The separations widened until open water slipped between the continents, first as narrow channels, then as broad passages, and finally as a complete ring of ocean encircling the southern pole. From that widening ring arose a current unlike any other on Earth. It formed not from storms or tides, but from geometry and motion, from the simple fact that nothing remained to block the path of water moving eastward around the globe. The Antarctic circumpolar current began as a steady flow and gradually strengthened, driven by planetary rotation and prevailing winds. With no continent to interrupt it, the current stretched into a continuous band, circling endlessly, gathering momentum across thousands of kilometers. It became a liquid boundary, a moving wall that separated the Southern Ocean from all warmer seas beyond. Within this revolving belt, water remained contained, turning upon itself like a great slow wheel. Warmer currents from the north found little passage inward, deflected by the strength of the flow. The Southern Ocean settled into its own private system, its temperatures governed by internal exchange rather than distant influence. Layers of water sank and rose in stately cycles, carrying nutrients and gases through depths and shallows in a rhythm that rarely changed. Stability took hold, not as stillness but as consistency, a pattern repeating so faithfully that life could begin to lean upon it. Isolation such as this reshapes evolution with quiet authority. When populations remain enclosed, generation after generation, their traits no longer mingle with relatives elsewhere. Small variations accumulate, preserved instead of diluted. Over immense spans of time, these gradual differences become distinctions, then signatures, then entirely new forms. The Southern Ocean became a vast living archive of such divergence, its inhabitants shaped by conditions found nowhere else and by the long absence of outside exchange. Elsewhere on the planet, Shifting climates and mingling waters constantly redraw the boundaries of survival. Here the boundaries held, lineages followed their own paths, guided by the steady pulse of the encircling current. The result was not sudden transformation, but a slow unfolding, like a story written line by line, across ages too long to measure, each chapter sealed gently within the turning sea. Not all freezing begins at zero. In the Southern Ocean, numbers loosen their ordinary meaning, and water slips past the boundary where stillness should claim it. But the secret rests within the water itself, in grains too small to see. Salt drifts between the molecules, quiet and invisible, yet decisive. It interrupts the neat lattice that pure ice prefers, lowering the point at which liquid yields to crystal. Here that surrender waits until about -1.8 degrees Celsius, a narrow difference that changes an entire ocean. Because of this, vast plains of polar water remain fluid, while colder air presses from above. When freezing finally begins, it does not descend from the surface as a single sheet. Tiny crystals appear first, delicate discs called fragile, turning slowly as they gather. They brush together, fuse and spread, forming a thin skin that thickens with patient hours. Salt is pushed away during this freezing, expelled into the water below as dense brine. The sinking brine carries cold downward, stirring layers that might otherwise rest apart. Through these motions, the ocean quietly rearranges itself, season by season. As darkness dominates the long winter, ice extends outward from the continent, a pale field widening across the sea. Months later, the returning sun softens its edges, and the frozen reach withdraws, loosening its hold on the surface. This steady advance and retreat shapes the lives below more surely than storms. Light follows the same rhythm. When ice is young and clear, sunlight passes through it in a muted glow, scattering into blue-green shades that drift downward. As the cover thickens and snow settles above, that radiance fades, yet never vanishes entirely. Even at depth, a dim illumination remains, enough for drifting cells of phytoplankton to waken during brighter months and rest when shadows return. The ocean beneath the ice lives by these faint signals, by salt and season and filtered light, all combining to keep water moving in a realm that seems destined for stillness. Within that restrained motion, chemistry and physics share a quiet partnership. Molecules slow as temperatures fall, yet the dissolved salts keep pathways open, preventing solid silence. Currents slip beneath the lid of ice, carrying traces of minerals and gases gathered from distant depths. Each particle travels as if guided by memory, settling, rising, circling, never quite at rest. In such water, freezing is not an ending, but a boundary that shifts and breathes with the turning planet. Seasons pass across the surface, yet below, the liquid world persists, held in balance by salt and cold together. It endures in suspension, a quiet defiance of ice, sustained by laws written into every drop. Nothing here rushes, and nothing truly freezes completely. Before muscle moves or nerve flickers, before any fin presses gently against the sea, a quieter exchange must occur. It happens without sound or motion, a trade conducted molecule by molecule. Oxygen slips from water into living tissue, an invisible arrival that sustains every drifting body below the surface. In polar seas, this arrival is unusually generous. Cold water holds gases more readily than warm water, as if the chill itself creates extra room between molecules where oxygen can rest. In tropical regions, the same gas escapes more easily, rising back toward the air in restless streams, leaving less behind for those below. Temperature shapes this balance with steady authority. As warmth increases, solubility declines. As water cools, it becomes a reservoir. The Southern Ocean, held in perpetual cold, stores oxygen in quantities rarely matched elsewhere on Earth. Within living cells, this dissolved oxygen becomes a partner in transformation. It enters microscopic chambers where nutrients are dismantled and reassembled, releasing energy that powers motion, growth, and repair. These reactions unfold in structures known as mitochondria, whose quiet chemistry sustains the long patience of polar life. Without sufficient oxygen, these processes slow, then falter, then cease. With abundance, they continue unhurried, supporting bodies that rely on steady supply rather than rapid bursts. The passage from seed to cell occurs through diffusion, a gentle migration guided only by concentration. Oxygen moves from where it is plentiful to where it is scarce, crossing thin membranes as though passing through open doorways. Many marine animals rely on this passive flow alone. Their surfaces, whether skin or delicate gill filaments, serve as meeting places where water and tissue briefly touch. In colder seas, where oxygen crowds the surrounding water, each contact delivers more of it. The gradient remains favorable, and the transfer proceeds without strain. Size begins to follow this chemistry. Larger bodies contain more cells, and more cells require more oxygen. In waters where supply is limited, growing too large would leave inner tissues waiting too long for their share. Yet, in oxygen-rich cold, diffusion can satisfy greater distances. Limbs may lengthen, bodies may widen, and still the inward drift of molecules keeps pace. Structure adapts to opportunity, guided not by urgency, but by quiet sufficiency. So the unseen gas, dissolved and dispersed, becomes a silent architect. It sets gentle limits, then relaxes them, shaping proportions across generations. In these southern depths, its presence is constant, neither hurried nor scarce, and life adjusts its form accordingly, expanding within the calm allowance of breath carried by water. Time moves differently in cold water, not the measured time of clocks or orbits, but the inner tempo that guides living tissue, the pace at which chemistry unfolds inside flesh. Temperature leans gently upon these hidden reactions, slowing them as surely as winter slows sap within a tree. In such conditions, enzymes that would work swiftly elsewhere perform their tasks with unhurried precision, each transformation taking longer to complete, each pulse of energy released in smaller portions. This quiet deceleration shapes the lives of southern species from their earliest moments. Food becomes fuel more gradually, and that fuel is spent with equal restraint. Muscles contract without haste, digestion proceeds like a patient tide, and even the rhythm of a heart may stretch its intervals. Energy, so quickly consumed in warmer seas, lingers here. It is conserved not through effort, but through the simple influence of cold surrounding every cell. Because expenditure is low, survival demands less frequent feeding. An animal can endure longer pauses between meals, drawing steadily from what it has stored. This economy allows resources to be directed elsewhere, toward maintenance, toward repair, and quietly toward growth. Not rapid growth, not the swift enlargement seen in fleeting lives, but an incremental widening that continues year after year. Tissue adds itself in thin layers, almost imperceptible at any single moment, yet unmistakable across decades. Longevity follows naturally from such pacing. When metabolism runs slowly, the wear placed upon cells is reduced. Proteins hold their structure longer, membranes retain their balance, and the accumulation of damage proceeds at a softened rate. Life extends, not through any deliberate striving, but because each process unfolds with care rather than urgency. Years gather gently, like fine sediment settling on a still seabed, forming a record of endurance written in living form. With years comes opportunity for size. Growth that might cease early in warmer climates continues here, supported by steady reserves and minimal waste. Bodies lengthen, widen, or thicken according to their design, guided by genetic patterns yet permitted by environment. The result is a form of abundance created not by excess but by patience. Nothing forces these organisms to hurry, and so they do not. In this measured world, existence resembles a long exhalation. Motion remains deliberate, development unforced, and the passage from youth to maturity unfolds across spans that would seem vast elsewhere. The cold does not urge life forward. It invites it to linger, and in that lingering, size accumulates quietly, shaped by time itself. On the seafloor of the far south, a shape sometimes appears that seems assembled from lines rather than mass, as though an artist sketched an animal and forgot to fill it in. This is colossal, a sea spider whose body is slight, yet whose reach extends outward in remarkable proportion. Its legs stretch so far from its center that the creature can span nearly 70 centimeters from tip to tip, a wandering geometry of joints moving with patient coordination across sediment and stone. The body at the center remains small, almost understated, because much of the animal's living function has migrated outward into those elongated limbs. Inside them travel fluids that carry nutrients and dissolved gases, circulating through narrow channels that replace the need for dense organs. In most animals, respiration is concentrated in gills or lungs, but here the exchange occurs directly across the leg surface. Oxygen passes through the outer layer and slips into the internal flow, sustained by contact between tissue and surrounding water. Each step therefore serves more than motion. It renews the animal's supply simply by exposing more surface to the sea. Where oxygen is plentiful, such an arrangement becomes quietly advantageous. Long appendages provide expanded area for diffusion, allowing greater intake without increasing the bulk of the body itself. Instead of thickening its form, the creature lengthens it, distributing its living structures along slender extensions. The design appears delicate, yet it functions with steady reliability, supported by the surrounding pressure of the ocean, which holds each limb in gentle balance. Movement remains unhurried, each stride deliberate, as if the animal measures distance not in urgency but in reach. Within those limbs lie extensions of the digestive system as well, branching outward so that nourishment travels almost to the tips. This unusual anatomy reduces the need for rapid internal transport. Food and oxygen arrive close to where they are required, and waste returns along the same quiet pathways. Efficiency replaces speed. The spider does not chase or seize in haste. It drifts, pauses, and continues, sustained by a structure that favors breadth over density. Seen from above, it resembles a living compass rose drawn across the seafloor, its center anchored while its lines explore the surrounding terrain. Such proportions would burden a creature in many places, yet here they remain practical, even graceful. The limbs support the body, gather what it needs, and extend its presence into the water around it, turning size into reach rather than weight. In this form, scale is not expressed through mass but through distance, an elegant solution shaped by environment and time, carried forward step by careful step across the quiet floor of the southern sea. Beneath certain stones in ordinary gardens, small armored bodies curl into spheres, their plates fitted neatly like segments of a bracelet. These familiar pillbugs belong to a lineage far older than the soil they hide within, a lineage that extends outward into distant oceans where some of their relatives have taken on very different proportions. In Antarctic waters, Isopods appear not as tiny ground dwellers, but as enlarged reflections of that same design, their segmented shells stretched broad, their forms widened into creatures that can rest across a human palm. Their shape remains instantly recognizable. Plates overlap in careful sequence, forming a jointed shield that protects while still allowing measured movement. In warmer seas, such armor must be thick to resist predators and currents, which adds weight and limits size. In the Southern Ocean, the surrounding water bears much of that burden. Cold density supports the body from all sides, easing the strain that gravity would otherwise impose. With less need for heavy reinforcement, the exoskeleton can broaden without becoming cumbersome, permitting the animal to expand its frame while maintaining strength. Depth adds another quiet influence. As these crustaceans descend, pressure increases in steady gradients, pressing evenly across their shells. Rather than crushing, this uniform force stabilizes their structure, holding each plate in firm alignment. The architecture of their bodies responds well to such conditions. Segments lock together, distributing compression along the entire surface. In this way, pressure becomes not an obstacle but a companion, reinforcing the very form it surrounds. Their days pass in unhurried searching. Many Antarctic isopods live as scavengers, traveling slowly across the ocean floor in pursuit of what drifts down from above. They feed on remains, fragments, and fallen matter, gathering nourishment from what others leave behind. This lifestyle demands patience rather than speed. Food arrives unpredictably, sometimes plentiful, sometimes absent for long intervals. A measured metabolism and a sturdy frame allow them to endure these fluctuations, storing energy when it is available and spending it sparingly when it is not. Reproduction follows the same deliberate rhythm. Growth unfolds across extended spans, and maturity arrives only after years have settled into the body. Eggs develop gradually, sheltered within specialized pouches until they are ready to emerge as miniature versions of their parents. Such slow beginnings reduce risk, ensuring that each new individual enters the world prepared rather than hurried. Generations overlap like gentle tides, continuity maintained through time rather than through rapid renewal. So these distant relatives of garden pillbugs continue their quiet existence, enlarged yet unhurried, their plated forms shaped by cold, pressure, and patience. In their steady movements and enduring designs, scale becomes a natural extension of circumstance, a reflection of conditions that favor resilience over haste and longevity over speed. A flicker passes through the water column, quick and curved, like a drifting comma that suddenly decides to swim. The movement belongs to an amphipod, one of countless small crustaceans that inhabit seas across the world. Most measure only a few millimeters, living unnoticed among grains of sand or threads of algae, their arched bodies and many legs carrying them in short darting motions. They are among the most common animals in the ocean, present in such numbers that entire ecosystems rely on their constant grazing and recycling. In Antarctic waters, some members of this modest lineage follow a different pattern of growth. They retain the same curved silhouette and restless limbs, yet their scale increases until they rival the length of a human hand. The transformation does not alter their identity, only their proportions. Antennae extend like slender feelers, plates overlap along the back, and jointed legs paddle with steady rhythm. What is small elsewhere becomes expansive here, as though the blueprint of the creature has been gently enlarged without changing its design. Part of this enlargement rests in the quiet balance between hunter and hunted. In many regions, swift predators patrol with precision, selecting prey that can be subdued quickly. Where such hunters are abundant, small size can be an advantage, allowing animals to hide, scatter, or mature before they are noticed. In the Southern Ocean, certain traditional predators are fewer or absent, and this absence alters the subtle mathematics of survival. Amphipods that grow larger do not face the same constant trimming of their numbers, and over generations that freedom permits bodies to extend beyond the limits common in busier seas. Their outer covering contributes as well. Like other crustaceans, amphipods wear an exoskeleton, a shell that must balance protection with flexibility. In warmer environments, softer shells risk damage from bites or collisions, which encourages compact forms that are easier to defend. In colder conditions, the chemistry of this outer layer shifts. Calcium compounds harden more readily, forming sturdier armor without requiring excessive thickness. Strength arises from composition rather than bulk, allowing the animal to scale upward while keeping its frame manageable. So these enlarged amphipods continue their lives as their smaller relatives do, feeding, drifting, and occasionally darting in brief spurts of motion. They graze on organic particles, nibble at fragments, and sometimes scavenge what settles from above, their activities forming a steady current of consumption that keeps nutrients moving through the ecosystem. Seen together, they resemble a constellation of curved forms, suspended in slow motion, each one carrying forward a design shared across oceans yet expressed here in expanded measure, shaped by circumstance and sustained through quiet persistence. Far below the reach of waves, where sunlight fades into a muted haze, there drifts a form seldom witnessed yet long imagined. Mesonicoteuthis hamiltoni, known as the colossal squid, inhabits these southern depths with a presence both substantial and restrained. Its body extends in smooth, tapering lines, mantle thick and powerful, arms furnished with rotating hooks that turn slowly as it moves. Nothing in its motion suggests haste. It advances with measured pulses, drawing water into its mantle cavity and releasing it in gentle jets that carry it through the dim expanse. Most striking are its eyes, immense spheres set upon either side of the head, wider than any other known animal possesses. In the faint light that filters downward from distant skies, such size becomes a quiet advantage. Large eyes gather what little illumination remains, collecting scattered photons and focusing them towards sensitive retinas. In darkness, where brightness is scarce, breadth replaces intensity. The wider the lens, the more light can be received, and so vision persists even where shadows dominate. The surrounding water assists this design in subtle ways. Cold seas are dense and supportive, easing the effort required to maintain position. The squid's tissues, rich with ammonium compounds lighter than seawater, further enhance buoyancy, allowing it to hover with minimal exertion. Suspended in this balanced state, it can watch and wait rather than swim continuously. Energy remains conserved, spent only when a deliberate movement is needed. Feeding occurs in these deeper layers, where fish and other drifting animals pass through the twilight zone. The squid does not pursue them in frantic chase. Instead, it lingers, attentive, its vast eyes attuned to small contrasts of motion and shade. A flicker, a shift, a faint outline crossing the gloom, such signals are enough. Arms extend, hooks engage, and the moment closes with quiet precision. The design of its senses supports this patient strategy. Large eyes require resources to build, yet in an environment where metabolism proceeds slowly and oxygen is readily available, maintaining them costs less than constant swimming would. Vision replaces pursuit, perception replacing speed. Inside its body, a steady circulation delivers dissolved oxygen to tissues that seldom strain. Muscles remain prepared but relaxed, capable of sudden strength without continuous effort. This balance suits the stillness of its realm. Nothing urges it to rush. The colossal squid exists as part of a system where scale, light, and chemistry align, shaping a hunter that thrives through attentiveness rather than force. So it remains in those dim waters, neither hidden nor revealed, its great eyes open to the faint glow that seeps from far above. In that subdued radiance, it drifts, sustained by cold, supported by depth, and guided by sight that gathers even the smallest trace of light. There are fish in the Southern Ocean whose bodies seem almost translucent, as though the color of life itself has been gently set aside. These are the Antarctic icefish, members of a lineage that carries an internal difference, unlike that of most vertebrates. Within their circulation flows blood that is nearly clear, lacking the red pigment hemoglobin that usually binds and transports oxygen. In other creatures, such an absence would halt the steady chemistry of survival, yet here the system continues in quiet equilibrium. The secret rests partly in the surrounding sea, whose properties allow oxygen to remain plentiful in solution. Because the water holds so much of this invisible gas, the icefish can absorb it directly across the delicate surfaces of its gills and skin, drawing enough into its bloodstream even without specialized carriers. Oxygen dissolves into the plasma itself, drifting freely rather than riding within cells. The process unfolds without strain, assisted by the natural gradient between water and tissue, and by the constant motion of currents that pass along the body's surface. To support this unusual method, the anatomy of the fish has shifted in subtle yet profound ways. Its heart is large for its size, broad and powerful, moving blood with steady pulses that compensate for the lower concentration of oxygen per unit volume. Each beat sends a generous flow through vessels that are wider than those of related species, reducing resistance and allowing circulation to remain smooth. The network of arteries and veins spreads through the body like open channels, ensuring that oxygen carried in solution reaches muscles and organs without delay. Without hemoglobin, the blood is less viscous, thinner, and easier to move, which further aids this circulation. The heart does not need to force thick fluid through narrow passages. Instead, it maintains a gentle rhythm, sustained rather than hurried, suited to a creature whose life proceeds in measured motion. Energy expenditure remains modest, and the oxygen dissolved in the plasma proves sufficient for the fish's needs. Even the bones of these animals reflect their environment, lighter and less mineralized than those of many fishes, helping them maintain neutral buoyancy without constant swimming. They drift or glide with slight fin movements, suspended within their surroundings, supported by the balance between body density and water. In this state, oxygen uptake continues uninterrupted, each passing moment renewing the supply carried within their clear blood. Such physiology would falter elsewhere, yet in this cold southern realm, it forms a stable arrangement. The absence that might seem like a loss becomes instead a refinement, a system pared down to essentials and matched precisely to its setting. The icefish lives within that alignment, its transparent circulation flowing quietly, sustained by conditions that allow life to proceed without the crimson pigment most vertebrates require. In equatorial seas, life moves with a different cadence, one set not by stillness but by warmth. Water there holds heat gathered from constant sunlight, and that warmth reshapes the quiet chemistry that governs living bodies. Gases slip more easily from warm water into the air above, and oxygen, so vital to every cell, becomes less abundant in the liquid below. The difference is subtle in number yet profound in consequence, for each breath drawn from such water carries a smaller reserve. Creatures that inhabit these regions must live within that limit. Their tissues demand oxygen to release energy from food, and in warmer temperatures, those demands rise. Chemical reactions accelerate with heat, urging metabolism to proceed more quickly. Muscles contract more often, digestion completes sooner, and growth advances at a brisker pace. Life unfolds rapidly, like a story told aloud rather than written slowly across a page. Yet, speed requires fuel, and fuel requires oxygen. When supply is modest, bodies cannot expand indefinitely without outpacing the resources that sustain them. Size therefore becomes a negotiation between ambition and availability. Larger forms contain more cells, each requiring its share of oxygen delivered in time. In water, where dissolved oxygen is comparatively scarce, distributing that supply across great distances within the body becomes increasingly difficult. Circulatory systems must work harder, surfaces must exchange more efficiently, and energy must be spent simply maintaining balance. Beyond a certain scale, these costs outweigh the benefits of further growth, guiding evolution towards shapes that remain moderate in dimension. Predation adds another influence, one woven through daily survival. In warm oceans, diversity is high and hunters are plentiful, from swift fish to agile cephalopods. Movement is rapid, encounters frequent, and hesitation rarely rewarded. Under such conditions, smaller size can offer advantage. It allows quicker maturation, enabling an organism to reproduce before danger arrives. It permits hiding within crevices or among reefs. It reduces the time required to develop from fragile beginnings to independent life. Generations turn over swiftly, each one replacing the last in a continuous renewal shaped by risk. These patterns form a web of trade-offs, each strand connected to temperature. Warmth encourages speed, speed favors early completion, and early completion often aligns with smaller scale. Over long spans of evolution, species adapt to this rhythm, refining bodies that suit an environment of motion and competition. Large size is not absent, yet it arises under narrower circumstances, balanced carefully against metabolic cost and ecological pressure. So the oceans nearer the equator tell a different story of proportion. Their inhabitants flourish within limits set by heat, oxygen, and the pace of life itself. Where conditions press for swiftness and efficiency, growth settles into forms that can thrive without excess, shaped by waters that reward agility more often than magnitude. Across vast stretches of geological time, the southern continent has remained in a state of remarkable consistency, its surrounding seas changing far less than most regions of the planet. While other parts of Earth experience cycles of warming and cooling, rising seas, and retreating shorelines, this remote domain persisted within a narrow range of conditions. The constancy did not mean stillness, but rather a steady pattern, a long continuity that endured through ages when continents elsewhere reshaped their coastlines and climates, rewrote their rules. Such persistence shapes life in ways that unfold slowly yet decisively. When environments shift dramatically, species must adapt quickly or vanish, and rapid change often favors small forms that mature fast and reproduce often. In a setting where upheaval is rare, a different tempo emerges. Organisms can refine their traits across countless generations without the interruption of sudden catastrophe. Evolution becomes less like a sprint and more like a gradual widening path, each generation stepping only slightly beyond the last. Fossil records from Antarctic marine sediments reveal this gentle progression. Layers of ancient shells and skeletal fragments show lineages continuing across immense spans, their shapes altering by degrees so slight that only long comparison reveals the transformation. Structures lengthen, plates broaden, proportions adjust, not through abrupt leaps but through accumulation. The absence of repeated extinction-level disruptions allows these changes to persist, carried forward instead of erased. Stability also influences competition. In regions where conditions fluctuate wildly, ecological communities must reorganize again and again, with new arrivals replacing those that cannot keep pace. Here, the cast of species has remained comparatively constant, and relationships between predator and prey, grazer and substrate, have settled into enduring arrangements. This continuity reduces the pressure for drastic redesign. Instead of racing to survive the next environmental shift, organisms refine what already works, extending size or form gradually as resources permit. Over millions of years, such steady circumstances allow subtle advantages to compound. A slightly larger body that proves efficient 1 century may become standard 1,000 generations later. Because the surrounding conditions remain predictable, there is little penalty for specialization. Traits that depend on reliable temperature, chemistry, or seasonal rhythm can deepen and elaborate, supported by the assurance that those foundations will persist. In this way, the Southern Ocean becomes not only a habitat but a long memory. It preserves lineages, carries them forward, and grants them time, the quiet ingredient required for scale to increase without haste. Within that patient span, growth does not rush or strain. It unfolds as a slow inheritance, passed along through ages that holds steady enough for life to stretch gently into larger forms, guided by stability itself. Descent brings a gradual tightening, not felt as a squeeze, but as a steady presence that gathers with depth. Water presses from every direction at once, its weight increasing in quiet increments as distance from the surface grows. This hydrostatic pressure does not arrive suddenly. It accumulates, layer upon layer, until each creature living far below exists within a constant embrace of force, measured in tons above every square meter. Bodies respond to this surrounding weight in ways both subtle and structural. For animals protected by external shells, the uniform pressure can become a stabilizing influence. Exoskeletons that might flex or crack in shallower conditions are held in firm alignment when pressure rises evenly across their surfaces. The force acts like a supportive hand, preventing weak points from bending outward. Instead of resisting from one side, the shell receives balance from all directions, which can allow broader forms to remain intact without collapse. Inside softer bodies, fluids transmit pressure without distortion, passing it along so that tissues experience little difference between interior and exterior force. Cells continue their chemistry as before, their membranes supported rather than strained. Gases, however, behave differently. Any pocket of air compresses as depth increases, shrinking in volume and altering buoyancy. For this reason, many deep-dwelling creatures lack internal gas spaces. They rely instead on tissues and dissolved substances that maintain density close to that of the surrounding water. In such balance, sinking and rising require little effort, and motion can remain unhurried. Buoyancy itself becomes a quiet partner in shaping form. When body density matches the water around it, weight nearly disappears. Limbs can extend without dragging downward, and structures that might prove cumbersome near the surface become manageable. The surrounding pressure helps hold these forms steady, reducing strain on joints or connective tissues. In this way, depth can support larger proportions, not by urging growth, but by removing certain physical limits that would otherwise constrain it. Yet pressure alone does not create giants. Many regions of the ocean share similar depths and forces, yet their inhabitants remain modest in scale. Size emerges only where several conditions coincide, where chemistry, temperature, nourishment, and time align alongside pressure's steady presence. Without those additional influences, increased force simply becomes another aspect of environment, neither enlarging nor diminishing the creatures within it. So, the deep ocean's pressure acts less as a sculptor and more as a framework, a surrounding architecture that permits particular shapes to exist. It provides stability, alters buoyancy, and shapes materials, yet it does so impartially. Within that quiet compression, life assumes whatever form its other circumstances allow, each body held gently in equilibrium by the immense yet even weight of the sea. Within every living cell, countless proteins fold into precise shapes, each one a minute structure whose form determines its task. Temperature influences these forms with quiet authority. In cold conditions, molecular motion slows, and proteins move with greater restraint. Their vibrations softened, their collisions less frequent. For many organisms, such stillness would hinder life, yet Antarctic species possess proteins subtly tuned to operate in these lowered energies. Their structures remain flexible where others would stiffen, allowing chemical reactions to proceed even when heat is scarce. Enzymes in such creatures often display slight alterations in their architecture, small adjustments in the way amino acids align along their chains. These refinements reduce the energy required for reactions to begin, so metabolic pathways continue without strain. Processes that would stall elsewhere unfold steadily here, each step guided by proteins shaped through long adaptation. The effect is not speed, but reliability, a chemistry calibrated for consistency rather than haste. Among the most delicate challenges of polar existence lies the formation of ice within tissues. When temperatures fall near the freezing point of body fluids, crystals can begin to form, expanding into sharp structures that damage membranes and organelles. Antarctic fish avoid this danger through specialized antifreeze proteins dissolved in their blood and cells. These molecules bind to the surfaces of tiny ice crystals as they appear, preventing them from growing larger. Instead of spreading, the crystals remain minute and harmless, suspended like dust motes, unable to gather into solid frost. Cell division follows a slower rhythm as well. The cycle by which one cell becomes two depends on intricate coordination of DNA replication, membrane formation, and internal organization. In cold environments, each stage requires more time, not because it falters, but because the molecular machinery proceeds deliberately. This lengthened cycle means tissues develop gradually, their growth extending across years rather than weeks. New cells replace old ones at a measured pace, maintaining stability while allowing steady expansion. Over long spans, this patient multiplication contributes to physical scale. Structures enlarge through accumulation, layer added upon layer, as cells continue dividing at their unhurried rate. There is no sudden surge, only continuity. The body becomes a record of time's passage, each increment preserved rather than rushed past. Proteins keep their shapes, antifreeze molecules guard against crystallization, and cells reproduce with calm precision. Such efficiency does not arise from intensity, but from balance. Every molecular participant performs its role with minimal waste, conserving energy while sustaining function. In this manner, life persists and grows within the cold, guided by chemistry attuned to its surroundings. expanding not through force, but through enduring steadiness, written into the smallest structures of living matter. In certain corners of the Southern Ocean, absence has shaped life as surely as presence. Long ago, many regions of the world's seas filled with predators capable of cracking shells or tearing armored bodies apart, hunters equipped with crushing jaws or reinforced claws. Yet in these isolated waters, such specialists remained scarce for immense stretches of time. Their rarity left a subtle quiet in the balance of survival, a space where vulnerability did not always invite destruction. Within that open margin, creatures encountered fewer threats designed specifically to break them. Without constant pressure from shell-shattering hunters, forms that might elsewhere be reduced or eliminated found room to persist. Over generations, this gentler landscape allowed structures to change gradually. Bodies could broaden, limbs could lengthen, and protective coverings could lighten, not because danger vanished entirely, but because it shifted in character. Predation still existed, yet it did not focus relentlessly on crushing strength. This absence created ecological niches, small openings in the intricate web of roles that species occupy. When such openings remain unfilled, evolution often sends new variations to explore them. Some organisms grew larger simply because nothing prevented them from doing so. A body that expanded slightly beyond the usual range might continue unhindered, passing its proportions onward. Over long spans, these increments accumulated, and what began as variation settled into a common trait. Size itself can become a form of quiet defense. A larger animal presents a more formidable presence, not through aggression, but through proportion. Predators that rely on speed or stealth may find such prey less practical to subdue. The effort required to overpower it increases, while the certainty of success may not. In this way, scale alters the arithmetic of pursuit. Even without armor or weaponry, greater dimensions can discourage attack, shifting attention towards smaller and more manageable targets. There is also an efficiency hidden within magnitude. Larger bodies often store energy more effectively than smaller ones, losing it more slowly relative to their mass. Reserves last longer, allowing survival through lean intervals when food drifts sparsely. In environments where nourishment arrives unpredictably, such endurance becomes an advantage. A creature able to wait calmly can thrive alongside one that must feed constantly, and over time this capacity supports the persistence of larger forms. So the history of predation here is written not only in tooth and claw, but in restraint. Where certain hunters were few, possibility widened. Organisms expanded into that quiet allowance, their shapes reflecting an ancient balance between risk and opportunity. Within these waters, scale became one of many answers life discovered, a measured response to a world where danger existed, yet seldom pressed hard enough to forbid growth. Far from continental edges, and far beneath the paths of ships, the open ocean descends into regions where sunlight never arrives. In those immense depths, life continues in forms that echo a pattern already seen in southern waters. Certain creatures there also attain unusual scale, their proportions exceeding those of relatives living closer to the surface. The resemblance is not coincidence, for the deep sea and the polar ocean share conditions that quietly guide bodies along similar paths. Both realms are governed by cold that persists without interruption. Temperature remains low throughout the year, changing little from one season to the next. This steady chill influences the chemistry of seawater, allowing it to retain generous stores of dissolved oxygen. Though darkness defines the abyss while pale light filters through polar shallows, the underlying physics aligns. In each place, oxygen rests plentifully within the surrounding water, ready to pass into living tissue whenever contact occurs. The inhabitants of these distant zones often rely on comparable strategies. With oxygen readily available, internal transport can proceed efficiently, even across extended bodies. Tissues receive what they require without rapid circulation, and metabolic processes unfold at a measured pace. Growth stretches across long intervals, producing forms that expand gradually rather than quickly. Limbs, appendages, or entire bodies lengthen and widen as years accumulate, their dimensions supported by the quiet sufficiency of their environment. Pressure differs between these regions, yet it does not disrupt the shared trend. In abyssal depths, the weight of water presses constantly from all sides, while in polar seas, shallower layers feel less of that force. Still, in both places, the surrounding fluid supports structures that might strain under air. Buoyancy reduces the pull of gravity, allowing larger frames to exist without excessive effort. The contrast in depth changes details of anatomy, but the general permission for scale remains present. Food arrives differently, though even this distinction reveals a parallel rhythm. In the abyss, nourishment drifts downward from distant surface waters, settling slowly like a fine rain. In southern latitudes, seasonal abundance supplies energy in pulses, yet in each setting resources may be intermittent, encouraging bodies capable of enduring long pauses between meals. Larger forms can store reserves and spend them gradually, a trait that proves useful whether sustenance descends from above or appears during brief productive periods. Thus, two distant realms, one defined by depth and the other by latitude, arrive at similar outcomes through related principles. Cold, oxygen richness, and supportive water combine to shape proportions that stand apart from those of warmer seas. The resemblance does not suggest imitation, only that life responds consistently when conditions align. Across both abyssal plains and polar expanses, scale becomes an answer written in flesh, composed slowly wherever the environment grants the same quiet allowances. Some shells resting on the southern sea floor hold within them a quiet record of years, layered so finely that time itself seems pressed into calcium. These belong to Antarctic bivalves, modest in appearance yet remarkable in duration, whose lives can extend beyond a century. They spend their days partially buried in sediment, valves opening and closing with gentle regularity, filtering nourishment from the water that passes over them. Nothing in their movement suggests the length of their existence, yet within their shells, a chronology unfolds with patient precision. Each season leaves a trace along the inner surface, a faint band marking a period of growth. As months pass, new material is deposited along the shell's edge, expanding its curve by increments too small to see in a single glance. Over decades, these increments accumulate into visible rings, much like those of ancient trees. Scientists who examine them can read the sequence, counting years one by one, tracing fluctuations in growth that mirror subtle changes in the surrounding sea. The shell becomes a biography written in mineral script, preserving a life's duration long after motion has ceased. Aging in such animals proceeds with remarkable restraint. Cellular processes continue at a deliberate pace, limiting the gradual damage that time can inflict upon tissues. Proteins retain their structure, membranes remain stable, and metabolic reactions unfold without urgency. Because wear accumulates slowly, decline also arrives slowly. The body maintains its functions across spans that would exceed the lifespan of many other marine creatures. Longevity emerges not as an anomaly, but as a natural consequence of steady internal rhythms aligned with external conditions. With extended years comes extended growth. Unlike animals that reach a fixed adult size and stop, many bivalves continue enlarging throughout their lives. Their shells broaden, as new layers form, and the soft body within expands to match the increasing space. The change is gradual, almost imperceptible from one season to the next, yet unmistakable across generations. An individual that survives for decades has time to add countless layers, each one contributing to its final dimensions. This connection between lifespan and size shapes populations over evolutionary time. When individuals live long enough to grow larger, their presence influences the average scale of their species. Offspring inherit tendencies towards similar longevity and similar patterns of growth, and the trait persists. In this way, time itself becomes an ally of magnitude, granting organisms the opportunity to extend their forms simply by continuing to exist. So these quiet dwellers of the seafloor embody a gentle equation. Years gather, layers form, bodies widen, and size becomes a reflection of endurance. Within the curve of each shell lies a slow arithmetic written by life and duration together, a testament to how patience, measured in decades, can shape the very dimensions of living things. When sunlight returns to southern latitudes after months of absence, it does not arrive with sudden brilliance, but with a gradual brightening that filters through the upper layers of the sea. In those illuminated waters, microscopic plants awaken. Phytoplankton, suspended like fine dust within the currents, begin to photosynthesize as light increases, drawing carbon from the water and shaping it into living matter. Their numbers swell during these brighter periods, forming vast seasonal blooms that tint the ocean with faint hues of green and gold. These blooms become the quiet foundation of an entire ecosystem. Each drifting cell holds energy captured from sunlight, stored within delicate structures that sustain the next level of life. Among the first to gather are krill, small crustaceans that move in coordinated swarms, their translucent bodies pulsing as they feed. They graze continuously when phytoplankton are abundant, filtering the water with specialized appendages that sieve nourishment from the surrounding flow. In doing so, they convert microscopic productivity into living substance large enough for others to consume. Krill occupy a central place in this web of exchange. Fish, seabirds, seals, and whales depend upon them, drawing energy upward through successive links. The efficiency of this transfer is remarkable. Because krill feed directly on primary producers, little energy is lost between sunlight and larger animals. Each stage passes nourishment onward with minimal waste, allowing substantial biomass to be supported by seasonal bursts of growth. The structure resembles a carefully balanced ladder, each rung spaced so that energy climbs steadily from the smallest cells to the largest bodies. The rhythm of this system follows the cycle of light and darkness. During the long winter, phytoplankton growth slows, and krill descend to deeper layers or rely on stored reserves. Activity quiets, not vanishing but resting, as though the entire community inhales and holds its breath. With the return of brighter months, production resumes. Cells multiply, swarms rise, and feeding intensifies. The ocean shifts from restraint to abundance, then back again, repeating this pattern year after year with gentle regularity. Within such cycles, timing becomes as important as quantity. Many organisms coordinate reproduction with the bloom, releasing young when food will be plentiful enough to sustain them. Larvae drift among the phytoplankton, feeding as they grow, their survival linked to the precise alignment of life stages with seasonal productivity. Over generations, species refine these schedules, adjusting them to the dependable cadence of light and nutrient availability. Thus, beneath the surface, an intricate network persists, sustained by sunlight, microscopic plants, and the tireless grazing of krill. Energy flows upward through this system in measured steps, supporting creatures of increasing scale while remaining rooted in the smallest forms. The entire web rests upon cycles that repeat with calm consistency, a living pattern shaped by season, sustained by light, and carried forward through countless returning summers. Across the Southern Ocean drift countless small bodies, each no longer than a finger, yet together forming one of the greatest living masses on Earth. Antarctic krill move in vast congregations that stretch for kilometers, their numbers so immense that they rival the biomass of many of the planet's largest animal populations combined. Seen individually, they appear delicate, almost translucent, their limbs beating in soft coordination. Seen collectively, they become a living current, a slow, shifting presence that binds the ecosystem together. Their importance lies not in size but in accumulation. By feeding on microscopic plant cells suspended in the water, they gather energy that began as sunlight and transform it into animal tissue. This conversion places them at a crucial junction in the flow of nourishment. Larger creatures do not need to graze on countless individual phytoplankton cells, for the krill have already assembled that scattered abundance into concentrated form. A single mouthful can contain the captured productivity of thousands of drifting organisms. As krill feed and grow, they also participate in the ocean's carbon cycle. The plant cells they consume contain carbon drawn from dissolved carbon dioxide, and when krill produce waste or sink after death, that carbon descends toward deeper layers. In this way, the swarms help move carbon away from the surface, carrying it downward where it may remain stored for long intervals. Their lives, therefore, link the atmosphere, the upper ocean, and the depths below, forming a biological pathway through which elements travel. Many of the Southern Ocean's largest inhabitants depend upon this small crustacean. Baleen whales glide through dense swarms with open mouths, filtering thousands at a time. Seals pursue them in quick bursts. Fish gather among them, and seabirds dive to snatch them near the surface. Each predator draws strength from the same source, their bodies sustained by the steady availability of these drifting animals. The giants of this realm owe their scale not only to cold and chemistry, but also to the reliability of this food supply. Abundance changes what is possible for growth. When nourishment appears consistently and in great quantity, organisms can invest energy in building tissue rather than searching endlessly for their next meal. Time spent feeding shortens, reserves accumulate, and development proceeds without interruption. Over generations, such conditions support bodies that reach greater proportions, for the resources required to maintain them remain within reach. Thus, the smallest swimmers help sustain the largest forms, linking extremes of scale within a single network. The swarms continue their slow migrations through the water, countless individuals moving as one, their presence shaping lives far larger than themselves. In their quiet persistence, they become a foundation, a living reservoir from which an entire world draws strength. 30 million years ago, the southern continent entered a long transformation, not through sudden upheaval, but through a gradual descent into colder ages. The change unfolded so slowly that no single generation could perceive it. Temperatures eased downward across millennia, currents shifted their paths, and ice began to persist where it had once melted. What might seem abrupt when measured in geological charts was, for living populations, a steady turning of conditions that invited adjustment rather than flight. As cooling continued, organisms responded in increments. Those with traits suited to slightly lower temperatures survived a little more readily, passing those advantages to their offspring. Subtle variations accumulated within populations, each generation differing only faintly from the last. Over long intervals, these small differences gathered into recognizable distinctions. Proteins altered their folding patterns, membranes adjusted their composition, and metabolic pathways tuned themselves to the surrounding chill. Adaptation did not arrive as a dramatic shift. It arrived as continuity shaped by persistence. Isolation deepened this process. With the Southern Ocean set apart from other seas, exchange between distant populations became rare. Groups that once shared ancestry found themselves separated by vast stretches of water and time. Without regular contact, their genetic material followed independent paths. Mutations arose, some neutral, some beneficial, and in the absence of intermingling, they remained within each lineage. Gradually, these genetic signatures diverged like dialects of a language spoken in distant valleys. Across millions of years, such divergence produced new species, each one distinct yet linked by ancestry to earlier forms. This branching pattern resembles a living tree whose limbs extend quietly outward, splitting again and again as generations pass. Fossil evidence and modern genetic analysis together reveal these relationships, tracing how one lineage gave rise to another, how traits appeared, persisted, or faded. The Southern Ocean became a realm where speciation could proceed at its own pace, guided by environmental steadiness and separation from outside influence. Some descendants retained familiar outlines, while others developed novel proportions, their bodies reflecting the selective pressures unique to their surroundings. Features that proved useful under colder conditions remained, while those less suited gradually disappeared. Over immense spans, this refinement produced communities of organisms whose forms harmonized with their environment. Each species carried within its genome a record of past climates and ancestral choices, encoded not in words, but in sequences of nucleotides, passed faithfully from parent to offspring. Thus, the present inhabitants of these waters represent more than isolated curiosities. They are the outcome of a narrative written across tens of millions of years, a progression shaped by cooling seas, separation, and inheritance. Evolution here has unfolded like a slow tide, advancing without haste, shaping life through patience rather than urgency, until the living world came to match the enduring character of its southern home. Hidden within every cell lies a script written in chemical letters, a sequence that guides how a body forms, grows, and endures. In the Southern Ocean's inhabitants, this script has been refined across ages, not rewritten abruptly, but adjusted through delicate edits that influence how genes are used rather than what they contain. Gene regulation, the process that determines when and how strongly a gene is activated, shapes development as surely as the genes themselves. Certain growth-related genes may remain active for longer periods, allowing tissues to continue expanding beyond the limits seen in other regions, while others reduce their activity, slowing processes that would otherwise hasten maturity. Such regulation acts like a dimmer rather than a switch. Instead of turning functions fully on or off, it adjusts intensity, guiding cells to divide at measured rates and to build structural proteins steadily. Hormonal signals, transcription factors, and molecular tags on DNA all participate in this orchestration, ensuring that growth unfolds in harmony with environmental conditions. Over generations, patterns of regulation that suit the surrounding waters become more common, carried forward through inheritance until they define the character of a species. Within this genetic framework, oxygen transport has also been shaped by adaptation. Some organisms possess altered versions of genes responsible for proteins that bind or distribute oxygen, enabling these molecules to function efficiently in cold conditions. Variations in these sequences can change the affinity of a protein for oxygen, adjusting how readily it captures and releases the gas. Such refinements ensure that tissues receive a steady supply even when temperatures influence chemical reactions. The result is a system tuned not for rapid bursts of activity, but for reliable delivery across extended lifespans. Mutation, the source of genetic novelty, proceeds quietly in environments where external stresses remain limited. When conditions fluctuate dramatically, radiation, temperature swings, and chemical shifts can increase the frequency of genetic change. In a setting marked by long-term stability, these pressures remain subdued. DNA replicates with fewer errors, and repair mechanisms correct many alterations before they persist. The pace of mutation slows, not halting entirely, but settling into a gentler rhythm. This reduced rate allows successful genetic arrangements to endure, preserving traits that match the environment well. Over immense spans, such steadiness shapes entire lineages. Beneficial regulatory patterns remain intact. Oxygen-handling proteins retain their effectiveness, and growth continues according to inherited timing. Evolution still occurs, yet it advances with patience, guided by subtle variation rather than constant upheaval. The genome becomes a quiet archive, storing solutions discovered long ago and passing them onward with remarkable fidelity. In this way, the biology of these organisms reflects a partnership between inheritance and habitat. Genes do not act alone, nor does environment dictate everything. Instead, they interact continuously, each influencing the other, until growth, form, and function align with the conditions that surround them, written softly into the language of DNA. Not every organism in the Southern Ocean follows the path toward great size. Alongside the expansive forms drift countless smaller lives, each shaped by its own balance of needs and limits. The tendency toward enlargement exists only where conditions permit it, and for many species, those conditions remain only partially met. Growth, though possible, must always negotiate with the boundaries imposed by structure, energy, and design. Bodies are governed by proportions that cannot be ignored. As a creature increases in length or mass, its volume expands faster than its surface area. This mathematical relationship affects how nutrients enter, how wastes leave, and how internal tissues receive what they require. For organisms that rely heavily on diffusion across body surfaces, a larger size can become impractical, since inner regions lie farther from exchange points. Beyond a certain scale, the distance alone slows essential transport, placing quiet pressure on form. Energy also sets its terms. Even in environments where resources may be plentiful, each added gram of tissue demands maintenance. Cells must be supplied, repaired, and kept in balance. Muscles require fuel to contract, organs require circulation to function, and all of this must be sustained continuously. For some species, remaining small ensures that these demands stay modest. A compact body can be nourished quickly, its system supported without strain, allowing it to thrive without accumulating excess mass. Structure imposes further boundaries. Skeletons, shells, and connective tissues must bear the weight of the body they support. Materials have limits to their strength, and although surrounding water reduces strain, it does not erase it entirely. If a frame grows too large without sufficient reinforcement, joints may weaken or surfaces may fracture. Evolution, therefore, shapes size in concert with architecture, permitting enlargement only when supportive features evolve alongside it. Life history patterns contribute their influence as well. Species that reproduce rapidly often invest energy in producing offspring rather than in extending individual growth. Short generations can favor smaller forms that mature quickly and continue the lineage without delay. Others that develop slowly may grow larger, yet only if their environment allows the long span required for such expansion. Each strategy represents a different solution, neither superior nor inferior, simply suited to particular circumstances. Thus, gigantism emerges not as a universal rule, but as one possibility among many. It appears where multiple factors align, where energy, structure, and biology cooperate. Where even one of these elements differs, size may remain restrained, and smaller bodies persist as the most effective design. The ocean holds both outcomes together, vast and minute existing side by side, each shaped by its own quiet negotiation with the laws that govern living form. Change sometimes begins so gently that it resembles continuity. In recent centuries, however, the waters surrounding the southern continent have shown signs of a gradual shift, one measured not in visible motion, but in temperature. As global climates warm, even these remote seas absorb a portion of that heat. The increase may seem slight when expressed as numbers, yet water responds to such alterations with quiet sensitivity, and one of the first consequences appears in the way it holds dissolved gases. Warmer water cannot retain oxygen as readily as colder water. The molecules move with greater energy, creating conditions that allow gases to escape more easily into the air above. As this process unfolds, the amount of oxygen available within the ocean slowly declines, a trend scientists describe as deoxygenation. It does not occur uniformly, nor does it arrive all at once. Instead, it advances gradually, region by region, layer by layer, altering the invisible chemistry that sustains marine life. In places where organisms have long depended upon abundant oxygen, even modest reductions can influence biology. Tissues that once received generous supplies may encounter leaner conditions, and the balance between size and respiration may shift. Larger bodies, which require greater distribution of oxygen to maintain their cells, could face new limits if concentrations fall. Growth might proceed more slowly, or reach smaller final dimensions, as physiology adjusts to the changing environment. The same qualities that once supported expansive forms could become less reliable if the surrounding water no longer provides the same abundance. These adjustments need not occur abruptly. Evolution often responds through gradual selection, favoring individuals whose traits suit emerging conditions. Over generations, populations may display subtle differences, reflecting the slow alteration of their habitat. Some species might adapt by modifying metabolic demands, others by altering developmental timing. Still others may retreat to cooler layers or regions where oxygen remains more plentiful. The response unfolds across years and centuries, guided by inheritance and circumstance together. Scientists monitoring ocean chemistry have documented these patterns across multiple basins of the world, noting consistent declines in dissolved oxygen linked to rising temperatures and shifting circulation. Instruments lowered into the sea record the changes with precision, tracing variations that would otherwise remain undetected. Their measurements reveal a planet whose waters are quietly adjusting to a warming atmosphere, each reading a small entry in a growing chronicle. Within this unfolding transformation, the relationship between environment and form continues its long dialogue. Conditions that once favored expansive proportions may soften, encouraging different balances between growth and survival. Life will persist as it always has, yet its shapes may reflect the altered chemistry of the waters that sustain it. Long before any living creature traced its path through today's southern waters, earlier inhabitants left their shapes impressed into stone. Along certain Antarctic coasts, layers of ancient sediment hold fossils of marine animals that lived millions of years ago, preserved in mineral detail so fine that ridges, joints, and delicate surfaces remain visible. These remnants lie quietly within the rock, yet they carry records of bodies that once moved through seas very different from those of the present. Among these fossils are shells, carapaces, and skeletal fragments belonging to species whose proportions rival or exceed those of their modern relatives. Some ancient crustaceans display broadened segments and extended limbs, while certain mollusks reveal thickened shells and wide openings where soft tissue once resided. Though time has replaced living material with stone, the outlines remain clear enough to measure. Paleontologists study these forms carefully, comparing them with contemporary species that inhabit the region today. The similarities suggest continuity, while the differences trace subtle changes shaped across vast intervals. Through such comparisons, patterns begin to emerge. In several lineages, fossil specimens show that large body size appeared early and persisted across successive geological layers. Rather than fluctuating dramatically, proportions often remained within a similar range, indicating that conditions favorable to growth existed long before the present era. In other cases, fossils reveal gradual enlargement across strata, each younger layer containing specimens slightly larger than those below. These sequences resemble a slow unfolding, as though evolution extended a line little by little across the ages. The stone record also preserves moments of transition. Some fossils display features intermediate between ancestral and later forms, their structures combining traits that would eventually separate into distinct species. Such specimens illustrate how new variations arise and endure, carried forward through inheritance until they become characteristic of entire populations. Each fragment, therefore, serves not only as a relic of an individual life, but as a chapter within a broader narrative of change. Examining these remains alongside living animals shows that the tendency towards substantial size is not a recent development. It is a long-standing theme woven through Antarctic marine history. The persistence of this pattern suggests that environmental influences supporting larger proportions have endured across immense spans of time. Even as climates shifted and continents moved, certain underlying conditions continued to favor bodies that expanded beyond ordinary limits. Thus, the fossil layers act as a quiet archive, storing evidence of forms that once flourished and linking them to those that inhabit the region now. Stone and life mirror one another across ages, revealing continuity shaped by deep time. Within that continuity, scale appears again and again, not as an isolated curiosity, but as a recurring expression of the Southern Ocean's enduring character. Measurement begins with attention. When scientists study the proportions of marine animals, they do not rely on impressions or comparisons alone. They use precise definitions that allow size to be understood in consistent terms across species and environments. In biology, gigantism does not simply mean large. It refers to bodies that exceed the typical scale expected for their lineage, measured against relatives that share ancestry but live under different conditions. Establishing this distinction requires careful observation, statistical comparison, and the patient collection of specimens and data. One of the guiding principles behind these comparisons is the relationship between surface area and volume. As a body grows, its volume increases faster than its outer surface. This mathematical rule shapes how organisms exchange materials with their surroundings. Surface area governs contact with the environment, determining how efficiently oxygen, heat, and nutrients can pass inward or outward. Volume represents the amount of living tissue that must be supplied and maintained. When an organism doubles in length, its volume rises far more than twice, while its surface expands more modestly. This imbalance influences every aspect of physiology, from respiration to circulation. Biologists often describe such relationships through scaling laws, patterns that show how different features change with size. These laws reveal that proportions do not always remain constant as bodies enlarge. Bones may thicken to support greater mass. Hearts may increase disproportionately to move fluids across longer distances, and appendages may lengthen to maintain effective interaction with the environment. By plotting measurements across many individuals and species, researchers identify trends that indicate how growth alters form. These patterns help distinguish ordinary variation from true gigantism, clarifying when size has extended beyond expected limits. Field studies provide the raw material for these analyses. Specimens collected from research expeditions are measured in detail, their dimensions recorded alongside environmental data such as depth, temperature, and oxygen concentration. Photographs, tissue samples, and genetic sequences contribute further layers of information. Back in laboratories, these records are compared with databases containing measurements from related species around the world. Through such comparisons, scientists can determine whether a particular organism's size reflects a general trend or a specialized adaptation. Mathematical models then translate these observations into broader understanding. Equations describe how growth affects structural stress, energy demand, and transport efficiency, allowing predictions about which sizes are feasible under given conditions. When real organisms match those predictions, confidence in the underlying principles increases. When they differ, new questions arise, guiding further investigation. In this manner, size becomes more than a visual impression. It becomes a measurable property defined by ratios, patterns, and relationships that connect form with function. Through careful quantification, the immense and the minute can be compared within the same framework, revealing how the dimensions of life follow rules that remain consistent even as bodies vary widely in scale. It is tempting to imagine temperature as the single sculptor of size, as though cold alone could stretch bodies into grander proportions. Yet nature rarely follows such simple rules. While low temperatures influence metabolism and chemistry, they do not act in isolation, and many cold places on Earth contain animals no larger than their relatives elsewhere. The presence of chill sets the stage, but the outcome depends on how many other conditions step onto that stage alongside it. Consider mountain lakes high above sea level, where water remains near freezing for much of the year. These environments host fish, insects, and crustaceans adapted to cold, yet most remain modest in scale. The same holds true for northern rivers and temperate winter seas, where temperatures fall low, but gigantism does not appear as a common pattern. In such places, oxygen levels, food supply, ecological relationships, and seasonal variability differ from those of the Southern Ocean. Without the full combination of supporting factors, low temperature alone cannot guide growth toward unusual dimensions. Cold influences biological processes primarily by slowing them. Chemical reactions proceed more gradually, development stretches across longer intervals, and energy use declines. These effects can support extended lifespans and steady growth, but only if other requirements are met. Adequate oxygen must be present to sustain tissues, nourishment must be available to build new cells, and environmental stability must allow generations to persist without frequent disruption. Remove any one of these elements, and the pathway toward large size narrows. In regions where winters are severe, but summers grow warm, conditions shift too widely for certain adaptations to take hold. Organisms there must tolerate rapid changes, often favoring flexibility and quick reproduction rather than long-term expansion. Likewise, in waters where nutrients remain scarce, even slow metabolism cannot compensate for limited resources. Bodies must remain small enough to survive on what is available, conserving energy rather than investing it in growth. The Southern Ocean represents a rare alignment of influences. Its cold persists year-round. Its chemistry supports steady physiological function, and its ecological systems provide reliable nourishment. These factors interact continuously, each reinforcing the others. Temperature plays a role, yet it acts as one voice within a larger chorus. Only when all the notes sound together does the pattern of enlarged forms emerge. Understanding this complexity reveals that gigantism is not the product of a single cause, but of many conditions working in concert. Cold may open the possibility, yet it cannot fulfill it alone. Life responds to entire environments, not isolated variables, and size reflects the balance of every force that shapes an organism from the inside outward. Mass carries a quiet advantage. When a body increases in size, its relationship with energy changes in ways that are not immediately visible. Larger organisms do not require proportionally more fuel for each unit of tissue they possess. Instead, their energy use rises more slowly than their volume, meaning that each gram of living matter demands slightly less support than it would in a smaller form. This principle, observed across many kinds of life, allows substantial bodies to function with surprising economy once they have formed. The reason lies partly in geometry. Volume grows faster than surface area as size increases, and surface area is where much energy exchange occurs. Heat, for instance, leaves an organism through its exterior. A small body, with relatively more surface compared to its mass, loses warmth quickly and must expend energy to maintain internal balance. A larger body, presenting less surface for each unit of volume, retains heat more effectively. In cold surroundings, this retention becomes a subtle benefit, reducing the need for constant metabolic activity. Within tissues, similar relationships apply. Circulatory systems distribute nutrients and oxygen across internal spaces, and in larger forms, these systems can operate at steadier rates. Organs do not need to work in rapid bursts, for the body's greater reserves buffer fluctuations in supply. Energy can be stored in muscles, fats, or other tissues and drawn upon gradually. This capacity allows large organisms to persist through intervals when resources are scarce, sustaining themselves without immediate replenishment. Survival often depends on such endurance. Environments where food arrives irregularly reward creatures able to wait calmly between opportunities. A body with ample mass can rely on its stored resources, continuing its essential functions while surroundings offer little. Smaller organisms, possessing fewer reserves, must secure nourishment more frequently. Thus, size influences not only how energy is used, but also how long life can continue without new intake. Structural stability contributes as well. Greater mass provides inertia, a resistance to sudden change. Currents, disturbances, or brief shifts in conditions affect large bodies less dramatically than small ones. This stability reduces the need for rapid corrective movement, conserving energy that might otherwise be spent on constant adjustment. Over time, These small savings accumulate, shaping a pattern of efficiency that favors sustained existence. So, enlargement, once achieved, can become self-supporting. The body that grows beyond modest scale gains advantages in heat retention, resource storage, and steady function. Energy flows through it at a measured pace, neither rushed nor wasted. In this balance, magnitude becomes more than an outcome. It becomes a means of persistence, allowing life to endure with quiet efficiency within the conditions that surround it. Steel hulls sometimes press slowly through frozen seas, their reinforced bows parting the surface so that hidden waters can be reached. These vessels, known as icebreakers, serve as moving laboratories that carry instruments, researchers, and delicate equipment into regions otherwise sealed by drifting flows. Their engines rumble steadily, not in haste, but with deliberate patience, allowing passage across expanses where ordinary ships would halt. From their decks, cables descend into the depths, bearing sensors that record temperature, chemistry, and movement, each measurement adding a quiet line to the record of understanding. Below the surface, exploration continues without human presence. Remote submersibles slip into the water and descend, guided by signals transmitted through long tethers or silent acoustic commands. Their lights reveal landscapes that sunlight rarely reaches, illuminating animals whose forms drift or rest along the seafloor. Cameras mounted on these machines capture slow movements, gentle feeding, and the unhurried rhythms of life in that distant realm. Mechanical arms sometimes extend to collect specimens, lifting them carefully into insulated chambers so that fragile tissues remain unchanged during the return to the surface. Observation also occurs beneath the ceiling of ice itself. In places where the frozen layer remains unbroken, scientists bore narrow openings and lower instruments through them. Under ice, cameras drift in the darkened water, recording scenes that unfold quietly overhead and below. The frozen sheet acts as a translucent roof, filtering light into soft illumination that allows shapes to appear without harsh contrast. Through these lenses, researchers witness interactions that would otherwise remain unseen, from drifting organisms to slow migrations along the underside of the ice. Far from the shifting sea, research stations stand on the continent's edges and interior, their structures anchored against wind and cold. Within these outposts, samples gathered from the ocean are examined with microscopes and analytical tools. Measurements of tissue composition, genetic material, and growth patterns take place in controlled rooms warmed against the surrounding chill. Data flows from instruments to computers, where patterns emerge through careful analysis. Charts and models form gradually, translating observation into explanation. Each method contributes a different perspective. Ships provide access, submersibles provide vision, cameras provide patience, and stations provide interpretation. Together, they create a network of inquiry, extending from open water to laboratory bench. Through this network, knowledge accumulates slowly, assembled from countless observations made across seasons and years. In this way, the study of Antarctic giants unfolds not through a single discovery, but through sustained attention. Technology acts as an extension of human senses, reaching into depths and distances that would otherwise remain beyond perception. What returns from these efforts is not only data, but a clearer sense of how life persists and grows within one of Earth's most remote oceans, revealed piece by piece through instruments guided with steady care. Time moves differently in remote oceans. Changes that seem sudden on land often unfold slowly in these southern waters, where currents circle steadily and life follows rhythms shaped over immense spans. Yet even here, the future is not fixed. Subtle alterations in climate and ice patterns are beginning to influence conditions that have remained stable for ages, and with them come new pathways along which evolution may travel. The continent has long been separated from other landmasses by wide bands of circulating water, a natural boundary that limits exchange between ecosystems. This separation has allowed species to develop along their own trajectories, shaped mainly by local conditions. If surrounding temperatures continue to rise, however, currents may shift in strength or direction, and regions once isolated could become more connected. Organisms from distant seas might gradually extend their ranges, entering habitats that have rarely known outside arrivals. Such movement would introduce unfamiliar competitors and predators, altering relationships that have persisted undisturbed. At the same time, the frozen margins that expand and contract with the seasons may change in extent. Ice that once lingered longer into the year could retreat earlier, modifying light levels, nutrient cycles, and the timing of biological activity. In places where melt increases, fresh water from glaciers may spread across the surface, forming layers that differ in density from the saltier depths below. These layers can influence circulation and the distribution of dissolved gases, shaping the conditions in which organisms grow and reproduce. As environments shift, species respond through adaptation, migration, or decline. Evolution operates through gradual selection, favoring traits suited to present circumstances, yet environmental transformation can occur more quickly than genetic change. When this imbalance arises, populations must rely on existing variation within their members. Some individuals may possess characteristics that allow them to endure new conditions, and over generations those traits become more common. Others may lack such variation and diminish in number. The outcome depends on the pace of change and the flexibility already present within each lineage. The future of life in these waters therefore rests on an interplay between persistence and transformation. Isolation may soften or endure, ice may withdraw or stabilize, and ecological networks may reorganize in response. Through it all, evolution continues its quiet work, shaping forms according to the circumstances that surround them. Whatever directions these currents of change may take, the living inhabitants of the Southern Ocean will reflect them, their bodies becoming records of the conditions that guide their unfolding story. Silence defines this ocean more than motion. Beneath its surface, processes unfold without haste, guided by conditions that favor patience over urgency. In this secluded realm, life develops according to principles that reveal themselves only to careful observers. The waters function as a vast natural laboratory, not constructed by human hands, but shaped by geography, chemistry, and time. Within it, every organism becomes both subject and record, carrying evidence of the forces that formed it. Here, time does not press forward with sharp edges. Growth proceeds gradually, measured not in sudden transformations but in steady continuance. Generations follow one another with little disturbance, allowing subtle variations to accumulate. Traits that might vanish elsewhere have space to persist, refined across centuries until they become defining features. The result is a living archive, where bodies display the history of their surroundings as clearly as inscriptions carved into stone. In such conditions, size emerges as a quiet solution rather than a display of dominance. Expansion does not signal conflict or conquest. Instead, it reflects balance, a response shaped by temperature, chemistry, nourishment, and stability acting together. Larger forms move through their environment with unhurried assurance, sustained by systems tuned to the rhythms of their habitat. Their dimensions express harmony with circumstance, each proportion aligned with the demands of survival. The principles guiding these outcomes remain unseen, yet they operate with steady consistency. Physical laws govern how tissues exchange substances, how structures support weight, and how energy flows through living systems. Biological inheritance carries successful variations forward, preserving traits suited to prevailing conditions. Over long spans, these influences weave together, forming patterns that appear almost intentional, though they arise from simple interactions repeated countless times. Extreme environments often reveal such patterns most clearly. Where conditions differ strongly from the familiar, life cannot rely on ordinary strategies. It must adjust, experimenting through variation until forms emerge that match the surrounding world. The Southern Ocean offers such a setting, its characteristics distinct enough to encourage unusual solutions. Within its boundaries, evolution explores possibilities that remain hidden in more moderate regions. So the waters at the edge of the world become more than a habitat, they become a place of demonstration, showing how living systems respond when shaped by persistent extremes. Each creature drifting, resting, or gliding there embodies a lesson written in structure and motion. Together they illustrate a truth that extends beyond any single species, that life, given time and the right conditions, reshapes itself to meet the demands of its environment, revealing quiet laws that guide the unfolding story of the natural world.